What's up, NBA fans? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast network and channel. Giving a shout out to the rest of the crew. I'm talking about Shy, Kelvin, Jermaine, KB Film Room, Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right, that's right. For everyone who's tuning in, we hope that you support Behind the Bench or continue supporting Behind the Bench. Become a subscriber or subscribe to the channel and help make this show the best that it can be. And we want to thank you for earning over or choosing to become a subscriber. We now have over 2,200 supporters of this channel, and that's an amazing feat. You know, our goal really is to expound and talk of sports in a way that it always upholds history. You know, that's the best way to do it. We all have our opinions and beliefs or whatnot, or favorite players, or favorite athletes, favorite squads. But you always have to take into consideration the history. And when it comes to the NBA, that's not happening. And that's why you have this constant tug of war going back and forth, eras, plumbers and firemen and all this nonsense, and no skill. This era didn't have no skill. Every time you watch a game now, they talk about skill level instead of just calling the game. When we saw amazing high wire acts in the 80s and 90s, guys jumping over cats' shoulders, and Dominique Wilkins crashing down on 3-4 guys. We weren't sitting there talking about, well, they're better than yesteryear. It was more like, man, okay, this dude going off today. But really the critique was, can so-and-so superstar lead their team to the promised land in the championship? It's really a turnoff to hear this all the time. And it's unfortunate. The nays and the says are trying to prove a point that don't need to be proven. They can't focus on the now, the present, because of narratives and agendas, and it's bringing down the whole commentary of the NBA. And I'm not just saying it just to be talking. I've watched the NBA myself individually. Not saying I know more than the next person. I just try to uphold the history. I've been watching the NBA since the merger. When I was a kid myself, the merger. I've seen many a great player, many a great team, many a great moments, many a great victories, and many a great defeats. And I take it all into account and uphold the history. So when you hear this talk about, this is the thing. If all is what somebody know is what has been presented to them since they started watching the NBA, then it's really difficult to grasp a different circumstance. Not necessarily reality, but a circumstance that, the NBA we see today. I'm not talking about the style of play. I'm not talking about 3-point shooting and all this jazz. I'm talking about when it comes to competition and what players are willing to do to achieve victory, whether it's for the good of the team or good for the league. And like I said, I have my favorite player. Let me put it this way. You ask a fan today who's grown up with the NBA, watching the NBA over the past, or started watching the NBA over the past 15 years. And if you ask them, this question, you say, do you honestly feel, or do you feel that you're getting a true, how can I say this? Are you being presented with an absolute, authentic framework when it comes to competition, superstar versus superstar? Are you actually experiencing a situation where there's no angles. There's really no extreme advantage in terms of who you have on your team. Or are you really honestly witnessing who is the best among the best? We didn't have that problem in the 60s. Wilt Chamberlain versus Bill Russell. To me, the greatest individual rivalry in the history of this league. They faced each other over 200 times, close to 200 times in their career, regular season, postseason, whatnot. We've seen so many great battles between teams, all-time rivalries. Of course, the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Boston Celtics. In the 80s, late 80s, it was the Detroit Pistons versus Chicago Bulls. That was about as physical as basketball as you're going to see. And then the New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls. Arguably, I'm not gonna say the Knicks were more physical per se, but they were just as intense, if not more, than the Pistons in the grand scheme of things. So what I'm trying to say is, during the 80s and 90s and 2000s, when the season concluded, I always felt that there was really no question about who was the best. I'm talking about when it comes to the point of superstars reaching their prime. I never felt that, man, they got over, or how can I put this? That team didn't deserve to win the title. In the grand scheme of things. And what I'm getting at is there's a lot of misconceptions being parlayed right now on a lot of these sports shows, man. And it's unfortunate that the youth generation of today, they're being misled. They're being misled. And I'm not just saying that just be talking just because I grew up in the 80s, watching the NBA of the 90s. No, it's not about that. It's about it is what it is. I had no problems with the NBA commentary of the 90s or the 2000s. I enjoyed it all. I enjoyed all the takes, man. Doug Collins, when he was number one analyst in NBA basketball when he was on providing color commentary for NBA on NBC. Oh man, cream of the crop. And of course, Hubie Brown, the legend himself, he can still call a good game. I never really, there was really never, like, when you heard analysts call a game, you didn't get a sense of favoritism or bias. Like, Tommy Heinsohn, when he's a Boston Celtic, he bleeds Celtic green. But man, when he was calling them games, them finals games between the Celtics and Lakers, man, you could never tell if he played for Boston or not. You could never tell. He was objective. He was rational. No bias. If the Lakers were playing better than the Celtics during a certain stage of the series, he said it. If he felt Magic was playing more, being more effective in that particular game than Bird, he said it. Or vice versa. If Bird was proven to be the better player, he said it. They called it as it was. That was the beauty of it. So it gets me to this constant debate about NBA expansion. What era was watered down, right? But I always go to competition. And NBA expansion is actually indicating that the NBA has excelled in such a manner where the growth of the league put them in position to expand. Because for all the fans today that been, being misled to or being led to trash the past and say, well, the 90s era was watered down. Well, the people that want to critique the 90s, they have the platform right now. But the 90s didn't create chaos. You didn't have any chaotic. It had nothing to do with social media not existing during that time. No, it had nothing to do with that. You didn't have narratives. See, that was what was so exceptional about the best player of that decade, Michael Jordan. The way he conducted his career and competed on that court, you could not generate narratives. It was what it was. Like, he was going to be so prepared, you had to bring your A game. And at the end of the day, that just made him bring his A plus game. That made him bring his A plus game. So what I'm trying to say is, because of Michael Jordan, there became more of an emphasis on defense. Not saying that teams didn't defend in previous decades, but it went from, well, the concept became we're going to transition from having 3 top scorers to having 2 top scorers and an elite defender to take the place of that third scorer. And that's why you saw scoring decrease in the 90s. It became more of an emphasis on defense. And I believe it's attributed to Michael Jordan's greatness. Because by the time he broke through the Pistons, he and Chicago Bulls broke through the Pistons, well, it was crystal clear that you couldn't beat them by trying to outscore them. Like being an exclusive offensive oriented team, you wasn't gonna beat them like that. You weren't gonna do that. So it gets to expansion. And let's talk about it being watered down. A watered down era. But when you really think about it, most of the premier college players who entered the NBA draft from 1988 up until 1994. Most of those top collegiate players were drafted not by staple franchises such as the Lakers, Celtics. Although they drafted excellent players too. I'm talking about like the top, like number 1 pick type players. Those players were drafted by the expansion teams. Larry Johnson was the number 1 pick of his draft. I believe that was the 1991 draft when he was selected by the expansion Charlotte Hornets. Shaquille O'Neal was the number 1 pick of the 92 draft, who was selected by the Orlando Magic. Glenn Rice, Ronnie Cycli were top level collegiate players when they were drafted by the Miami Heat. Then you had Alonzo Mourning. If I'm not mistaken, was he the number 2 pick of the 92 draft? Yeah, I believe he was drafted right after Shaquille O'Neal. He was drafted by the Charlotte Hornets. Then you had like Kendall Giles. Well, Grant Hill was drafted by the Pistons, but the Pistons was starting all over again. Okay, so most of your top collegiate players were being picked up by the expansion teams, selected by the expansion teams. And there's a misconception that the talent pool was diluted. But if you really look at it, it really wasn't. Because no superstar was made available for the expansion draft. They still remained with their respective teams. More than likely the teams who drafted them. The difference was, what changed was the depth of the second unit. The players who were drafted by the expansion teams were mainly like lower tier reserves or low tier starters, like a Reggie Theus, who was drafted by I believe he was the first player drafted by the Orlando Magic when they started off as a franchise. So it went from teams maybe having a 9-man rotation to having an 8-man rotation. That's not extreme. That's not extreme at all. So what I'm trying to say is the competition was not diluted. So by 1995, the upstart Orlando Magic. Well, let's go back. Shaquille O'Neal's rookie year, the Magic finished with a 500 record, 41-41. This before they got Penny Hardaway. Now, Chris Webber was selected with the number 1 pick by the Orlando Magic, and his rights was traded to the Golden State Warriors, where Orlando traded the rights to acquire Penny Hardaway. So right there, the Orlando Magic, and before that, they drafted Nick Anderson from the University of Illinois, who was one of the top college basketball programs in the nation during that time, right? So you're bringing in 3 top level of the best collegiate talent in the NCAA, and they were picked up by the expansion teams. So Shaquille O'Neal's second year, Orlando went from 41 wins to 50 wins in 1994. And then in 1995, they improved by 9 wins with 59 victories and advanced to the NBA Finals as an expansion team within 5 years. And then the following year, they had their best regular season ever with 60 wins, and they lost to the Chicago Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Charlotte Hornets went to the playoffs. They advanced to the playoffs like in their third year, let's say third or fourth year of existence, because they was the first wave of expansion in 1988. Miami Heat, in their third year of existence, advanced to the NBA playoffs for the first time. And then by 1996, 97, they won 61 games. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals, only losing to the Chicago Bulls. So you see the trend? Now, I do believe, in fairness, that they expanded the 2 Canadian teams that were founded, the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies. I do believe they added those teams too fast. They probably should have waited until the 2000s to add those expansion teams, because they mainly relied on high school players. They brought in high school players. But outside of that, Orlando Magic, who people were predicting, by the time they acquired Horace Grant from the Chicago Bulls, they were saying Orlando Magic would become the team in the 90s. That's what they said. That's how much talent they had. They had the best starting 5 in basketball. They had a better starting 5 from top to bottom than the 72 Chicago Bulls. But their defense, well, of course, you had Michael Jordan. He wasn't going to be denied. Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman with his rebounding and defense. That's what broke down the Orlando Magic. So what I'm trying to say is expansion actually elevated the NBA. It actually elevated. The only difference was instead of, in the early 90s, instead of the Lakers and Celtics and Pistons dominating, the landscape, they were replaced by the Orlando Magic, Charlotte Hornets, and the Miami Heat. The competition was still the same. It was just different teams, because the Lakers, Celtics had a run. It was an amazing run. Pistons had a run. It was an amazing run. You know what I'm saying? So NBA expansion did not set the league back at all. It did not. And if it wasn't for those expansion teams, you would have a team in Memphis right now, the Memphis Grizzlies. You would have the Toronto Raptors, who won their first championship in 2019. You would not have the Charlotte Hornets. You wouldn't have the Orlando Magic. You wouldn't have the Miami Heat. You see? They had to have a starting point, just as all franchises do. Okay, so the expansion elevated the league, and as a result, the league generated more revenue because they invested in promoting those expansion teams. By even doing the Chicago Bulls' first three-peat championship run, by 1993, the Charlotte Hornets were leading the NBA in merchandise sales. They became more popular as an expansion team than the two-time defending champion Chicago Bulls. So expansion is a sign of growth. Because if the league was not successful, they would have not reached that conclusion that they need to expand. Okay. So it was a plus, not a minus. It did not dilute the talent pool. But you know what diluted the talent pool? Voila. What really diluted the talent pool was the super team era. That's what diluted the talent pool. See, what they trying to pin on the 90s actually applies to this era. From 2010 to the present. Now, I do believe the super team era is reaching its conclusion. Think about it. The real talent dilution or extraction take place when superstars are taken from their respective teams or organizations and join forces. That's the real talent dilution, where competition becomes devalued. See, competition wasn't devalued in the 90s. It wasn't devalued in the 2000s. It wasn't devalued in the 80s. Because they'll say, the 80s featured super teams, but in all actuality, those teams were built by the organization themselves. And any team that stood out and won multiple championships, they were all-time championship teams. See, the mentality was different too. Because superstars weren't joining forces, weren't even thinking about joining forces. But check this out. When these three individuals decide to join forces, they probably didn't realize the can of worms that they were opening and the Pandora's box that was about to be unleashed. You had one superstar, a franchise player, who left a team that won 60 games in consecutive seasons. Picked to win it all, both years. We never seen that before. Ever. Another superstar was a top 10 talent in the NBA. Top 5 in PER. Left-handed. Had one of the best pull-up jumpers in the league at his position. And he became identified as the league's best, quote-unquote, stretch forward, power forward. He's still the prototype for that position to this day. Chris Bosh, his last 4 years with the Toronto Raptors, he averaged 22 and 10. His last 2 years in Toronto, he averaged 24 and 10. So we had a team that featured two players averaging over 25 points a game at the time that they joined forces. And the third player, a franchise player in his own right, who was averaging 24 points a game. We never seen that before. We didn't see that with Showtime Lakers. And if anybody go back and look at the Lakers of the 80s, they didn't have two guys averaging 25 points a game at the same time and the third guy averaging 20 points a game. Now, they had a couple guys that averaged over 20 points a game. We've seen that before. They ain't no big deal. They ain't no big deal. But they never had two guys averaging over 25 points a game and a third averaging 24 points a game. Neither did the Boston Celtics, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. I don't believe Robert Parrish ever averaged 20 points a game in his career. He may average 19, but he never averaged 20 or more. The 83 76ers, Mose Malone, that championship year, he averaged about 24.5 points a game. Dr. J averaged about 21 points a game. They didn't have no third guy joining forces in his prime, averaging 24 points a game. Dr. J started his NBA career and played with one team the entire time, the Philadelphia 76ers. So did Bobby Jones. So did Andrew Toney. The Detroit Pistons never had three players average over 20 points a game or more. This was the first time we ever seen something like that happen. And before someone may bring up Will Chamberlain when he went to the Lakers, and I think his first year was 68. Well, first of all, he was past his prime, and the year the Lakers won the 69 games and won the championship in 1972, he was mainly a defensive anchor and a passer. The top scorer that year was Gail Goodrich, a drafted player. Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, who were cornerstones for that franchise, throughout the 60s, they went to multiple finals, and they were just missing that final piece. They weren't looking to stack the deck. It's a totally different situation. So you had two franchises that were harpooned because its superstar left, basically high and dry. So therefore, you eliminate two organizations from the equation in the Eastern Conference as far as being a challenger or playoff team that you have to face to reach your goal in trying to win a championship. Two teams were eliminated. That's not what happened during the 90s. Those teams I mentioned, they built themselves. Other teams, Seattle Sonics, Houston Rockets, Utah Jazz, they meticulously built up their franchise over a period of 5 years, and then it's just a matter of their best players, outplaying the opponent to try to reach the ultimate destination. Totally different situation. But when you get three superstars entering a prime, and you had two players here that were entering a prime, then you had another player who was in his prime. So when you eliminate two teams from the equation, that makes it even much easier for you to advance round after round and reach the finals. And that's why that one guy said not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. Because in his mind, he was looking at it like, we about to run the table. See, the Bulls didn't think like that when they broke through and won their first championship. Now, they were confident that they could have a long run, but they sacrificed and they went through the fire before reaching the mountaintop. See, that's the difference, man. But in this era of superstars joining forces, it started off leaving organizations ill-equipped to deal with it. They didn't know what to do because we never seen nothing like this before. So they took major hits, especially in that Eastern Conference. But when a super team forms like that, competition gets devalued, position basketball gets devalued, mainly the center position. Players often have to play out of position, right? Coaching becomes devalued. because you stacking the deck in your mind. That's what lead a lot of these superstars now that have joined forces to say, man, we don't need that type of coach that's going to demand of us every game. But see, Showtime, Pat Riley demanded the absolute best out of his players. K.C. Jones demanded the very best out of his players for the Boston Celtics. Chuck Daly demanded the very best out of his players for the Detroit Pistons. Billy Cunningham demanded the very best out of his players with the Philadelphia 76ers. And Phil Jackson demanded the best out of his player for the Chicago Bulls. See, he asked Michael Jordan to be the free safety of the team, to fill in the gaps, to plug in the holes when the team needs it. He had the ultimate safety valve. The ultimate lifesaver. Captain America, whatever you want to call it. But he still demanded the very best from his team. But when you stacking the deck in your mind, you like, man, shit, we got it on lock. And then, you know what happens? Because you know that you have it on lock and that you're about to have a cakewalk, you start saying to yourself, man, we can limit the games that we need to play. Seeding becomes less important. But even in the 80s and 90s, the Bulls understood the importance of gaining home court advantage, which put them in position to finally overcome the Detroit Pistons. The Lakers, Showtime, understood the importance of home court advantage. The Boston Celtics understood the importance of home court advantage. The Philadelphia 76ers especially understood home court advantage after losing 2 finals to the Lakers in 1980 and 1982. And getting home field advantage in 1983, that set the table for them, as Moses Malone, the legendary all-time great Moses Malone, said, 4-4-4. Championship teams of the 90s, of the 80s, they were more cohesive. And they were actually more dominant. But a super team becomes top heavy. And even though they running the table off of sheer talent during the regular season, and in particular in the conference that they play in, they always come across that one team that's complete. And they become top heavy, and you see how flawed that a super team really is. Also, the super team has led organizations that have to try to manipulate the cap to try to fill out the rest of the roster, because you got 3 players taking up the majority of the salary cap. You didn't have that problem during the 90s. See, the 90s actually helped solidify the success of the 80s. See, you didn't have no complaints about all-star games back then. When you cut the game on, you was confident that the superstars was going to be in uniform, ready to play up to level. But the super team has devalued all of that. The super team, see, the 90s and 80s and 2000s and 70s and 60s, it understood the importance of the regular season. So because of that, players, their mindset was, we got to play as many games as possible to be prepared for postseason play, so we'd be at the top of our game. But the super team mindset devalues that process, where you feel you can sit out games. Thus, the term load management came into play. And because of that, I believe it's triggered more injuries. Because in your mind, you thinking I could take a game off here and there, but you're not in real tip-top shape. See, it's a trickle-down effect. You didn't see all these injuries in decades before. The dimensions of the court are still the same. The height of the rim is still the same. You know what I mean? Nothing has changed in that regard. And I believe all of this originated during the summer of 2010, when these 3 superstars joined forces. a lot of aspects and importance of what constitutes real basketball team building has been compromised and devalued. Now all of a sudden, a player who has a specialty such as being a great defender or a rebounder, well, they're deemed unnecessary or not good enough because you're looking to stack the deck. But oftentimes when you stack the deck, you have players on the team that they're more offensive oriented than defensive oriented. And when you start facing the real squad, you start seeing the deficiencies. It is not that they're not good or talented, it's that they're not equipped to play the role that otherwise would be custom, where you need a player who specializes in a particular aspect of the game. That's the difference between the 90s, the expansion era, or any other decade that preceded the super team era. Expansion further solidified the success of the 80s. The super team era has devalued every aspect of basketball. And it has trickled, that mentality has trickled over to the all-star game, where we see little to no effort, malaise, lethargy, no defense, teams out here scoring a combined 400 points, and people are turning off the telecast to go watch something else. See, this super team era has been a detriment to the game. And what has happened is, to rationalize the existence of the super team era, they try to tag that and associate past eras by saying they were super teams too. So now the history of the league is being misrepresented and distorted in the process. Because this era is not about the talent. You've had great players in every decade. It's not about that. It's the mentality, or the lack thereof. See, a superstar is supposed to think like a superstar. When you start joining forces, well, you're not really thinking like a full-fledged superstar, even though you're identified as such. But your mentality has been altered, and it trickles down. As they say, all thoughts start with the mind. Well, when you look at someone like Michael Jordan or the Kobe Bryants of the world, but we'll just say Jordan because he played in the 90s. His mentality was, no matter what changes you make, no matter what steps you take, I'm going to overcome that challenge. So his mind individually was beyond a super team. But a super team, when superstars join forces, what they're really saying is they feel they don't have the wherewithal or the know-how to lead their team to the promised land. That's what that truly signifies. And they wind up selling themselves short. You see what I'm saying? Because what did Dwayne Wade say? The reason why they formed that super team down there was to block Kobe Bryant from winning any more championships? Isn't that what he said? I'm just throwing that out there. So at the end of the day, as a fan of this league, a lifelong fan of this league, this era of superstars joining forces, it has been a negative and it has been a detriment to this game. You could not say that about any other decade that preceded. And I believe once this era of super team finally ends, then future eras of basketball would be appropriate. And the history of the game would be uplifted once more. See, it's chess, is not checkers. These super teams, they play chess. Real championship building takes the ability to think long term and play checkers. The real championship teams have longer standing runs than super teams. And unfortunately, my squad is caught a rat in the matrix of all of this. But all you can do, man, is just wait it out and just hope that it ends. Because when you witness real competition, man, you embrace it more, man. You remember those teams that went out there and got it done. Where they went down in history. You remember that, man. And that means something. If you truly love this, I'm not saying if you truly love the game, but you know, when you watched a lot of basketball in your life and you know was real and you know was not real. This era, for me, has not been fun to watch. I love to see competition because you know exactly where you stand. You know exactly where your favorite players stand. You know exactly where your favorite team stand. You know exactly where the league stands. You know exactly where history stands. But the super team has blocked that opportunity to witness who truly is the best. And therefore it's been a detriment. That's the difference between the two. So what today's influential voices are trying to pin on the 90s is actually the case of this era. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But that's the situation. It is what it is. I'll be glad when it's all over, man. I'm going to be thrilled and elated because this has been I just don't find anything exciting about three superstars joining forces. I just don't. That's not really nothing that it don't mean nothing to me. It don't mean nothing to me. Like Kobe and Shaq, they didn't join forces. Kobe started in this league as an 18-year-old. They built that dynamic up over a 4-year period. 4 years. And then they started winning championships together. It didn't happen overnight. A super team, you be trying to make it happen, bam, bam, boom. You know, but that's why, you know, I appreciate a team like the Denver Nuggets, you know, who started from scratch, you know, with Nikola Jokic, who worked his way to become the best player, two-time league MVP, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. A head coach has been with the team the whole time. Jokic has been in the NBA. That's what you call an organization. Flipping coaches around every other year, every 2 years, flipping the roster every year, you know, where you be forgetting the people who's on the team the previous year, mercenary style. I mean, look, at the end of the day, man, it's not conducive to helping this league truly move forward. It's taken away. It's a takeaway process. It's not a building process at all. So that's the difference between the two, the 90s and the 2010s. So I just want to drop that nugget. Until next time, this is JB for BTB, Behind the Bench.